Welcome to this discussion concerning the current management and treatment of the bison of Yellowstone National Park. The bison of Yellowstone have been the victims of an annual capture and slaughter or shoot to kill campaign. The reasoning, as stated by the Montana Department of Livestock, is a disease called brucellosis. Brucellosis would cause a cow to abort her first fetus. The bison contracted the disease from the cattle in the 1800s and have never passed it back in a natural setting. The bison get tested for the antibodies to the disease. If they test positive, they are killed. Unless they are shot in the field, then there is no pretest. The bison and cattle are not in the same place at the same time. The cattle are brought in from Idaho in June, pre-vaccinated for the disease as required by law, and the bison are slaughtered during winter months. The death toll for this year is 29. As they come out of the park for winter forage, there is zero tolerance. The spring migration is just beginning, and the pregnant females and yearlings are leaving the park. If things keep up the way they are, we will witness the deaths of hundreds of bison. The cooperating agencies are the Forest Service, Park Service, Fish Wildlife Parks, and the Sheriff and Highway Patrol. There is one grazing allotment on National Forest land that these wild bison are being slaughtered for. So I have invited these four speakers to speak on behalf of the bison. Mary Marr worked in Yellowstone Park from 1959 to 1997. From 1968 to 1997, she was acting research field ecologist for large mammals. She received her PhD in vertebrate zoology from UC Berkeley in 1970, and Mary is recognized as an expert in Yellowstone bison ecology. And Peter Illian, on the left, is a former evangelical minister and current executive director for Restoring Eden. He speaks out for those who cannot speak for themselves. He advocates for natural habitats, wild species, and indigenous cultures. Peter's writing has been featured in Outside Magazine, The Utah Reader, and Christianity Today. Scott Fraser is a Crow tribal member and spiritual traditionalist. He is concerned about the spiritual and physical health of both Native and non-Native people. And then Mike Meese is a co-founder and current executive campaign coordinator of the grassroots groups Cold Mountain, Cold River, oh no, not that. Cold Mountain, Cold Rivers, and Buffalo Field Campaign. That's who he's campaign coordinator for. Mike has produced over 20 environmental and human rights video documentaries. So now I'm going to hand off the little mic to Mary.
Curiosity, does my voice carry well enough without the mic?
Yeah. Do they need the mic for the video?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I'll just hold it. Is it taking well enough for you?
Yeah, it'll feedback though. Go ahead.
What works best?
Whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay. What I'd really like to talk about, as you know, I'm a research person, and I commend people like the Buffalo Field Campaign for doing so much to keep the focus on the issue of bison. But my field really is data. That's where I work from. And at some point, the issue outside the park isn't going to be relevant. What's really happening is inside the park, and very few people, including the Park Service, are really willing to pay attention to that. But let me comment a little more on the outside situation first, because I know that it's the current focus. And Jen is quite right in saying animals are leaving now with this spring movement. This is crunch time. With the whole long haul of winter, and then the snow is set up, and this is simply what we see. I brought along a map. This is the one that I think might be of most interest to you. There's one on each side, but I think most of you know the park layout. This is a map of snow depths. And the reason I brought it is that I'd like you to look at that west boundary and look at those snow depths. They're fairly similar to Pelican Valley, 200 inches. The point I'm trying to make is that the west boundary is not bison winter range. I know there's a student who has thrown out the idea no real supporting data, that this westward movement is reestablishing an historic migration. I'm sorry, I don't agree with that perspective. The archaeological data that I've been working with says we've had bison minimally on the northern range for 8,000 years, probably longer, at least in the lower reaches. But the northern range did not provide the colonization from the interior in my mind. The patterns would make no sense. They colonized from the west side, but not a spring-fall kind of a migration. They followed plant phenology in summer, moving up to the higher elevations. And I'd like to be able to show you the data, but we can't do that this morning. So I'm going to be making statements that I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to ask you to take on faith, and we can pursue the background at some point if you would like to do that. But this pocket on the west side where along the Madison River, bison move out toward Horse Butte, that travel route. And there's a foraging area, particularly where Highway 191 crosses the sedge and willow of the Madison River. That never even existed historically. That's backwater from Hebgen Lake Dam, which was built in 1908. And if you look at these snow depths, what makes a bison travel route is a combination, it comes down to energetics. Life isn't just what you take in, it's also the calories that you expend. And in this very harsh environment, which has deeper snows than anywhere else for bison in North America, some areas can give a travel route, whether going through streams, using hydrothermal, but what makes a good travel route is a combination of foraging sites, the depths of snow, the grades involved, the learning once animals have a destination. And as the reason I try to make this point is I can give you two examples of places, Sylvan Pass and Mount Washburn, where animals have crossed. In other words, they will make exploration trips, but it doesn't become an established route. It costs too much energy. And what we're looking at on this west side is a very, very limited kind of situation for the way bison, with that tremendous drive to aggregate, they will move to maintain those social bonds. Now, the hooker for what's going on in the park is that they can survive by breaking those social bonds. The winter of 96, 97, my minimum lowest air count in March was not much over 1,000 bison. But 2,000 bison survived the winter inside the park. They break their social bonds, they scatter. Dave and I'd worked together as a team for 37 years. We couldn't find them. But they will also do that, which means just playing the numbers game, which the present management tends to do, the brucellosis EIS, can be very misleading. I'd also like to comment on brucellosis and then leave it. I've learned more about brucellosis than I frankly ever wanted to know, and have co-authored several technical papers with Margaret Meyer, who has 50 years of research on just that topic worldwide. And as she puts it, brucellosis has different host organism relationships, different variations on a theme. The host organism relationship in bison is not identical to that of cattle. And the risk of transmission appears to be very low. Years ago, when I first started carrying this issue for the park, I contacted state vet offices. I was told they could not give me documentation of any case of transmission from wild bison. Now, in a fence situation, you can get transmission. The probability, in other words, is not zero. My approach would be risk management. After all, most of life is risk management. If you stay in bed, you might die from being a blob. If you get up in the morning, you might get run over by an RV. The probabilities of neither are worth thinking about, probably. But my point is that life is risk management, and absolutes are nearly impossible. But what I'd really like to touch on, how am I doing on time, Jim? Okay, is what's happening inside the park. Because in the process of using the park for winter, what we have done is change the energetics in that population. This is not a black and white issue. It's not a clear-cut cause and effect. It's a weight of evidence, which is the usual problem with most ecosystem changes, that they take place in time and space, and there are interacting factors. Weather variability is one of them, animal learning is one of them, the social behavior of bison is one of them. But the shift in the whole system is that we humans would appear to have provided energy-efficient travel linkages. These are not roads to bison. They are simply linkages, some of them, between places that bison want to be. And in doing that, we have driven this population westward. That's why we've had this west boundary problem. But consider, Jen mentioned that only, what did you say, 29 bison have been taken this winter. Mm-hmm. But the population, the last year's survey, is well over 3,300. Interestingly enough, the northern range was way over 900 when I checked back with the Bison office on numbers. Hundreds of bison this winter have gone north on the west side road from the interior of the park to the northern range. The numbers that I could put on the shift in 96, 97 were between 320 and 350. But all of this fits with what I'm trying to say. The west side is not truly winter range. And as the bison have learned, and as they have travel-efficient linkages, the whole thing is shifting. Now, the other problem is that though, again, the evidence is not direct, let me hasten to say that we do not have clear-cut 1 + 1 = 2. But we do have some factors that are very strongly indicative that habitat degradation is occurring inside the park. This means not as many bison can live there. We have shifted them from the harshest environment in North America, pelican. I had my first bison moving on a section of road in 1980 in February. Once pelicans started to move, they began to move the whole system westward. Bison do not go to the east boundary anymore. 1983 is the last year I have them on the east boundary. 1985 is the last year I have them crossing the Mirror Plateau from Pelican at all. In other words, we haven't just changed numbers. The real hook is that we've shifted the distribution, and the interior of Yellowstone is an anomaly. Neither elk nor bison over time, and by time I mean decades, could survive as a population if it were not for the geothermal history. It isn't just forage. Remember I said we're dealing with energetics. It's forage, but it's energy saving. They can congregate in these geothermal areas if their energy reserves are good from summer feeding, green forage. They can stand around. There may not be any forage, but they can stand there, save energy, survive. And so disproportionately, the numbers keep piling into those areas. And we have very clear-cut, I've been working all my air survey stuff, working up on campus with some population analyst people. And the weight of evidence, everything coming back off the computer, is supporting the patterns that I began to realize that I was seeing 12 years ago. And let me say this has been a learning process. Dave and I would talk in the airplane, we'd look, we'd say, what's going on down there? Something is changing. We could see visual changes. So I don't want to discourage the present by all means, because it's keeping attention focused. The brucellosis issue, I think you all know that brucellosis is in elk. I do not believe, as a biologist, that brucellosis can be eradicated from the wildlife in this area without eradicating the wildlife. Now that it is there, and there's some sound biological reasons for making that supposition. But, so the immediate is keeping an issue focused, but the real long-term future of the Yellowstone bison is what's happening inside the park. They'll move to maintain those social bonds. We're getting habitat changes in the park. They know where to go, and they will leave the park, and Montana will take them.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary. Now, Scott gets the little mic.
Oh. Now, do I have to have this thing? Can I get to walk around? I'll drag. Can you go work? If I walk around? Okay, I don't have any maps, you know, because I'd like to have a big map and we could do that. But I don't have any maps, and it's an interesting process. And what Dan asked me to do is sort of give you some of the cultural aspects of this process. And of course, you all realize that the 60 million buffalo were eliminated from the Great Plains. We know that as a fact. And by about 1883, that was finished in Montana. And the winter after that, about half the Native American population starved to death in the state of Montana. And our relationship to buffalo is so finite. It is such a nice natural boundary that when the population of buffalo go up, we go up as Native Americans. As the population of buffalo goes down, we go down. And a lot of spiritualists will state, you know, that we are the buffalo, and that's how it was from the beginning of time. We were considered the buffalo. And it's been interesting that our religion has renaissanced in the last 30 or 40 years. The buffaloes came back. Our religion was taken away from us in about 1891, and we couldn't perform a lot of the ceremonies because we had no buffalo. And we looked at this as being something we needed to adapt. We're an adaptable type people. We can adapt to most anything. And so we adapted a lot of our ceremonies to include some of the hybrid buffaloes that people were raising, so we were using some of those. And out of the great wisdom of the state of Montana, they decided when they decided to harvest these animals, and I use that term harvest loosely, because when you talk about harvesting, that means you're actually growing an animal and you're feeding it to be harvested to feed somebody. And you take that to slaughter. That means that you've actually raised this for food. Now, this isn't the case with buffalo. Actually, what's happened is the law has been designed to execute these animals. This is an execution. This isn't a harvest. This isn't a slaughter. This is a law. This is a rule. These are people with guns and uniforms, and they're executing these animals. Then these people give us the animals for us to pray with. Now, how many religions on this planet have that ability and that beauty, that a government will actually designate an executed animal for your sacred feast? I mean, it's a wonderful relationship that we have. Not only do they give us these animals, these executed animals, there is no guideline on how these animals are presented to us. When I've called the state and I've asked if there is any testing or monitoring of how the animals are being presented to the Indian groups, the state says it's not our problem. Our problem is to get them to slaughter, and we slaughter them, and then we turn them over to Indian groups or tribes. Now, my question to the state was, now, are you considering these Indian groups sovereign nations as tribal groups? And at that point, the state doesn't understand that concept. You see, I don't represent a tribe. I'm a tribal member of a sovereign nation. And our sovereignty was based on our treaties. And our treaties were designed to protect our culture, what was left of it after we were annihilated and our religions were broken down. So what's happening here is that we're such a unique group of people. Now, one, food is thrown on our table. It's not inspected. We have no idea how it's handled. It's not wrapped. It's not protected. It's only thrown on our table, and we're supposed to be happy. Pieces of these animals are given to us. They are not told or marked what these animals are from, and we are not able to design on whether the people who actually harvested these animals have any purity in them. We are not able to design who is able to kill these animals. We have no input in this process as people who have a religion and a sacred bond to an animal. These animals are harvested by people. They're executed by people in uniforms. They are put to death in slaughter homes. And we don't even know if the parts that are coming to us are from the same animal. We don't know if this head and this hide and this body is from the same animal. And yet we're told that we can use this for a sacred ceremony. In our concept of religion, it is important that these animals have given themselves to us as a people, as it was from the beginning, in that design, in our relationship from buffalo to human being, that this animal gave themselves to us as a sacred being to nourish not only the body but our spirit. Where does the state of Montana come in to be an intercessor of that bond? What gives them the right to do that? And who is speaking for the people? You know, we see all of these things about brucellosis, but who is saying, who's taking care of the women that are eating that meat? How many miscarriages are in the Indian people? How many Indian people have sickness from eating this material? How many Indian people have died because of mishandling of any of this material? Who knows or who cares? Who's following up on that? We have very little representation. And if you ask the state's comment from Karen Cooper is it's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is just to take it. Then we have somebody, and you can get a hold of them and ask them the questions, but they won't answer you. They won't answer you. So my concern has always been, the health of not only the animals, but the health of the people, who these animals are feeding physically and spiritually. It is my concern that if we as an Indian people are to come back as strong as we were at one time, as being representative of a spirituality that is under the sun and our life, then we need your help to speak out for that. We need your help to say, hey, these are people who need protection. These are people who have rights and authorities. And they have a relationship to these animals. And they need to be in these meetings. These sovereign nations need to be in these meetings because they have the background and they have the cultural value and they have the historians. You see, a lot of people will ask me, why isn't some of the Crow tribe, that's my tribe, why aren't they up here? Why aren't they up here protesting? Well, one, the Crow tribe was put on a reservation and all the buffalo were killed. In about 1920, the government is the word. The government came in and killed all our horses. Thousands of horses. They killed them all so that we would become dependent on agriculture and do farming. All our horses were killed. Thousands of them. In the 60s, the United States, the state of Montana came in and totally annihilated our buffalo herd based on brucellosis. 600 head in about a weekend. That's why the Crow tribe is. We're afraid. The Department of Livestock, we're afraid. And I want to say, too, is I can sympathize with the ranchers. If this group of people can make us afraid, certainly an industry is afraid of what the Department of Livestock can do to their livestock. I have never seen a rancher handle and haze their animals like the footage I've seen the Department of Livestock do to the buffalo. I have never seen a cow with its tongue hanging out this far. A rancher has never treated an animal like that. But the Department of Livestock, who represents them, does. And the Department of Livestock uses the cattle industry to be able to do that. And it's not the cattle industry's fault. It's not the cattlemen's fault, because that same winter, when all the Indians starved because the buffalo were killed, the ranchers who were going to come out here and make all their money, all their cows died, and they got stuck here in Montana. And that's why you have 5 generations of people in Montana. They're stuck here, still trying to make it work. If they had worked with buffalo, we would all be happy. So it's not their fault they're stuck here. And it's not their fault that they are afraid of the Department of Livestock, because we're afraid of them. They will wipe your stuff out, and they won't even ask you. They will come in, and they will terminate your herd. They'll dig a big pit, like the man who had the elk. They'll dig a big pit, and they'll shoot them, put them in the ground, and then, oh my, they'll wake up and say, we can't do that either. We have to burn them. There's a big mistake. We made a mistake. Personally, I think that the idea of this brucellosis-free status needs to be rethought. It was something of the 50s. We are in an ecosystem of the new millennium. Why are we using processes that we designed in the 50s to design the future? We need to rethink this. We need to re-legislate this brucellosis-free status and get that off the rancher's back. Get with the rancher and get them allies and get these sovereign nations in there, and let's get something done and quit having all of this activity happen and be blamed on different groups. Who's at fault? Mark Roscoe. He was at fault because he did not deal with the problem. He pushed it off on Judy Marks. Judy Marks doesn't have a clue. Why? Because it's not her problem. It was Mark Roscoe's problem. He pushed it off on somebody. He just moved it on. He killed thousands of buffaloes, that man. Killed thousands of buffaloes. He made us cry as a community. We saw so much of that on the front page of the newspaper day after day after day. He did that to us as a community. And he should never be allowed to forget it. So, my talk is a conclusion. I can go on and on, but I try to keep it down to somewhat to the day.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I had a hard time flying into Bozeman last night at, no taxi cabs when my plane landed, and I realized the airport's quite a few miles out of town. But so I'm a little bit rummy. My group is called Restoring Eden, and we found a verse in Proverbs 31:8 that says, "Speak out for those who cannot speak for themselves." So we speak primarily for natural habitats and wild species. We work with indigenous cultures in particular that have been Christianized by the missionary and that don't recognize that what I consider the true biblical stewardship is parallel with most of what I see as indigenous land ethic. What's been what you see a lot is a Western consumptive land ethic. So we don't claim to speak for indigenous communities, but we do speak within the church, helping the church community recognize that folks are your brothers and sisters. And a great parallel, if you ever get a chance, go down to Klamath Basin. 20 miles out of Klamath Basin are the lava beds where the settlers wiped out the Modoc Nation. And then as you drive 20 miles back from the Modoc Wars, all the signs that the farmers have is you stole our water and you stole our land. And I'm thinking, am I the only one who sees the irony here? So it's, but I do work in Papua New Guinea with tribes there, and we're now building a strong relationship with the Gwich'in community up in Alaska, who are Episcopalians. And so we're bringing Episcopalian youth groups who do these cultural exchange programs up to Alaska for summer projects, and then the goal is for them to come back. We're Machiavellian enough, and I hope this is a friendly room, to see if we can get youth groups from the elected officials who are Episcopalian from their churches to go up to the Arctic villages and work. So it's a combination between the Episcopal Church, our group, and the Gwich'in Steering Committee. Most of our work is not, we started trying to battle the religious right during the days of the 104th Congress, but what we found is that for every Helen Chenoweth, there were hundreds of folks that her message didn't make sense, but didn't have a safe place to go. And so what we talk about is loving, serving, and protecting God's creation. Probably 50% of our work is making it safe for church folks to love what God called good, which is, nature. I mean, I have my epiphanies, and probably most people in this room have, at some point, stood out in nature and knew in the depths of your souls that this is good. So we have some bumper stickers: your soul needs the wild, extinction isn't stewardship, and God's original plan was to hang out in a garden with some naked vegetarians, which is our ode to Adam and Eve. But what I do is I travel around the country speaking on the theology of wild. I'm heading up to Alaska next week for 3 weeks to speak in communities up there. And I wanted to share just briefly with you some of the language in the theology of the wild and how it relates to the bison issue. The first verse is in Genesis 1:24, and it says, God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kinds. And it was so. And God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And that word good is tov in Hebrew, and it means whole and complete. It means it's like an artist who says, all this art, at some point the artist said, that's it, it's done, it's complete. And I say that because there's this arrogance that says it's a better world when we come in. I love the wild because the wild is as God created it. I'm a creationist. I believe God created a world that continues to evolve, so I dodge the whole evolution creation debate. But I see the miracle of God in nature. I see just the scripture in Psalm says, in wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. And so what I see is God made the bison. And according to this, God made the bison through the land. Let the land produce living things. And the bison reflect God's wisdom. And the bison, by doing what the bison were called to do, are in fact being obedient and worshiping their Creator. I don't believe that the relationship between God and the bison has been broken. So we talk about God created the different species and called them good. God blessed them, told them to fill the earth. I love arguing with some of the religious right because they'll say, no, that was to humans. And it's like, well, my friend, quit thumping your Bible. Start reading it, because the first blessing in the Bible was for the birds and the fish to fill the earth. The first commandment of the Bible was for humans to tend and keep. And those are words of nurturing. So, and then we have the account of Noah. After God then protected the biodiversity, it says, this is a covenant with Noah. And this was where, we got the goosebumps the first time I read it, because somehow in all of my years as a minister, I just assumed it was the covenant with Noah was a covenant between God and people. But then when I read it, it said, I now establish my covenant with you. And a covenant's an unbreakable promise. So I now establish my unbreakable promise with you, with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you. The birds, the livestock, all the wild animals, all that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. And it goes on and continues to refer to this. So the bison also are in a covenant relationship with God. And when God called the bison good, he tells us later in Micah, he says, I have shown you what is good, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. The reason I'm here today is because what we're doing, I'm not anti-hunting. I'm not a vegetarian, and it shows, and I work with tribal cultures that, None of them I've ever known are vegetarians. But there's a respect and a connection to nature that is deep. And what we have so done is not understood justice, mercy, and humility. And if we apply justice, mercy, and humility to the bison situation, we realize it's not just what we do, and it's definitely not merciful. And there's no humility. There's the arrogance. And what the Bible refers to is the sin of pride. I don't want to get too preachy, but that's what I do. So it's just the curse of it all. But and I do believe that teaching is educating the heart, and preaching is, teaching is educating the brain, and preaching is educating the heart. And we do try to make it safe for people who already know they love God and love nature to admit it. And so we go to these Christian punk rock festivals, and we set up our Your Soul Needs the Wild. And, a couple morons will argue with us. And there's a verse you guys should all remember, Revelations 11:18, that says, He will destroy those who have destroyed the earth, which nobody ever quotes, but we like to point it out. But we find those folks that walk by and go, yes, 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 this is right. And then we say, could we have your name and address, trying to develop a grassroots movement. But I want to share with you was one quick parable, and as it applies to the bison situation. And these are a series of 4 parables, the prepared and unprepared bridesmaids, the parable of the talents, and the parable of do this unto the least of these, you do it unto me. But the first one, and it's the only one I'm going to talk about, is then, who then is the faithful and wise servant whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. I tell you the truth, he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is staying away a long time. And then he begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. And he says what he'll do is cut them into pieces and assign them a place with the hypocrites where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So Jesus in this parable says, look, this is probably as hard as he could get. Look, I'm going to chop you up, throw you where you're going to scream and moan for eternity. Are you paying attention? This is an important parable. So we look at it, and when we see this, we see great ecological parallels, and we see it as it applies to environmental stewardship. And I recognize that a biblical argument is only as strong as a person's belief in the Bible. It's like debating the Constitution with a Canadian. They're going to yawn and go, well, I don't care. And we're not out trying to make Christians out of anybody. We are trying to make environmentalists out of Christians. So I recognize that sometimes the environmental community has a visceral reaction to preaching, but the environmental community primarily is not our audience. But the faithful and wise servant, it means we have a choice. We don't have a choice whether or not we're servants. We have a choice if we'll be faithful and wise, or if we'll be foolish and greedy, because he calls the opposite wicked. And he says, whom the master has put in charge of his household to give them food at the proper time. In charge of the household brings up the whole dominion debate, but I think it's a moot debate. Whether God gave it or we took it, we've got it. I mean, chainsaws, bulldozers, dams, it's a moot point. We have unprecedented ability to destroy the earth. At the same time, we have a greater disconnect from the earth than we ever have, and this gap is what's hurting the world. We have power, but we have no more love or humility. So I don't even want to go into the whole dominion debate. But the household, and as I showed through the Genesis and the Noah, that all of the wild animals, all of the earth is part of the household of God. There's this arrogance that I hear all the time, says, well, God gave us the earth. Bullshit. It's nowhere in the Bible. It says the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The land is mine and you must provide for the redemption of the land. We don't own the earth. We have no right to destroy it. We may be able to eat from the master's garden, but we have no right to destroy the fruitfulness of that garden. So, and forgive me for cussing. Is it buffalo shit's probably the correct term here. But, and it says it'll be good for that master. It says to give them food at the proper time. What this scripture says is the faithful and wise servant recognizes that all of life is part of the master's household, and they make sure that the biological needs of the rest of the household are met, to give them food at the proper time. God in God's wisdom created species to be in places and to live in cycles. And it is not our place in arrogance to break those cycles. And when we do, what do we see? We see the beginning of extinction. We see the beginning of the destruction. And the Bible calls that the curse. But it goes on and it talks about the wicked servant who says to himself, the master's not coming around. I'm not going to be accountable for this. And then he beats the other fellow servants and he gets drunk with the drunkards. He has no longer controls his appetite. That word wise is prudence. And we used to name our daughters after virtues. There's still some faith, hopes, and joys out there. But when was the last time you've heard of a prudence? Maybe somebody's grandmother. But prudence is no longer a virtue. It's consumerism. Take it all, take it now, take it as fast as you can. And they say that's the wicked servant. That's no longer controlling our appetites. That's beating that which we were called to serve. So my message to the church is that we're called to be servant kings. We're called to love. We're called to serve. The Bible uses the illustration of Jesus who's willing to lay down his life. But we don't serve nature. We expect nature to serve us. And that's the wrong relationship. And so I'll conclude, but what I think is happening here is there is arrogance, there's ignorance, and there's greed that has just motivated folks, and they can no longer see in the bison the intrinsic value that they have because they were made, by God and for God and entrusted to humanity to love, serve, and protect. I am not against eating bison. I am not against hunting. I am against foolish. And just because we have the power doesn't mean we have the right. And it's time for us to begin to learn to recognize that what we do so often is, I'm going to use a 3-letter word, is sin. It's wrong. And so I support this group, and I just thank you that you speak out for bison that can't speak for themselves, and it's sacred work and it's holy work, and there's going to be some Baptists not in heaven and some pagans hanging out. It's just I'll just quit because I'll just ramble on. So.
To Mike.
So in April of 1998, it was about 6 in the morning, and I had skied about 1.5 miles to this beautiful area called Horse Butte along the Madison River. Now Horse Butte is on our national forests, and it's become, throughout the years, as Mary's described, since the mid-'80s, a very favorite place for the herds to come out in the spring and have their calves. Horse Butte is shaped as such that it's a big south-facing hill that the wind usually blows the snow off, and the first green shoots of the spring pop out up there, and it's one of their favorite places to come out and calf. And on this morning, it was rather cold, as it tends to be in the West Yellowstone area, and I went ahead and started a fire. And on those cold mornings with the open water, it takes a while for the mist to burn off the butte and to see what you're actually surrounded by. And about 9 o'clock, the mist started to burn off the butte, and ranging from the top of the butte all the way down to the water, there were 147 buffalo. About that time, I realized I had built my fire about 10 feet from the bluff that dropped off down to the Madison River. And on this glorious day, these 147 buffalo decided they were going to make the 5-mile trek back into Yellowstone Park, the area they're supposed to be safe in. And about that time, 147 buffalo, mainly in single file, some of the moms would be right next to their calf, all walked between 3 and 5 feet away from me and my fire. And not one of those buffalo at any time made any aggressive moves or showed that they had discomfort because of my presence. And it was about that time that I knew that until the buffalo had justice served, I was going to be there and do everything I could to have their voice be heard. The buffalo have touched me personally, and I can't speak for all the many, many members of the Buffalo Field Campaign, but I think we've all been touched by them in many different ways. The buffalo are shaped in a creature of, we have this elder in our community, Jesse Stovalt, who we refer to him and his wife as our surrogate grandparents. And he has a statement about the buffalo that goes something like this: "The buffalo are the fastest slow-moving animal I ever seen in my life." And the reasoning behind that is because they don't stay in areas and overgraze and destroy the land. They constantly are migrating and taking care of their land. Their hoofs are shaped as such that when they come through an area and they eat the grasses, the seeds are spilled. Their hoofs act as tills and replant these seeds, and then of course the magic fertilizer comes out the back, and we have a regeneration process in every one of their moves and in every one of their efforts. They also have a lot to teach humanity in the idea of family and community. The buffalo very much so take care of one another. When you watch them in the thick winter snows throughout Yellowstone, you'll always notice that they walk in single file. And then the lead buffalo, he or she, when they get tired, take a step aside and let the line progress on, and then they'll hop on at the end of the line. And they all take turns doing the massive chores to take care of each other, so that as many as possible can survive these extreme winters that they've been forced into this area that probably wasn't where they would like to be naturally, but where they were mandated to end up. We've watched on several occasions where buffalo had passed away due to a natural winter kill or a natural winter die-off, and witnessed where 9 buffalo would form a circle around their passed away brother and sister and have what seemed to us to be like a mourning ceremony or a service prayer for them passing their brother or sister on to wherever the buffalo end up when they die. Some other beautiful things that we've witnessed throughout the years. On one particular day, through the mass hazing efforts that the Montana Department of Livestock puts these animals through on a weekly occurrence, one of the big bull buffaloes got injured and had a severe limp, and he was out with 6 other of his brothers. And he had laid down and was trying to rest his leg, and the Department of Livestock drives up on their snowmobiles, and as soon as they arrived on site, the 6 other bulls that weren't injured started forming a circle around him, and the tails go up in the back of the buffalo. There's a gentleman in the town of West Yellowstone that has this little statement that I've always found great humor in, and it goes, "When a buffalo lifts his tail, he's either going to charge or discharge." And these guys were not going to the bathroom. They kept forming this circle around this buffalo that was injured, and then at one point, 2 of them got down on their knees and literally put their horns in the side and helped lift this buffalo up off the ground, and then they pounded a trail and escorted him back into the cover of the red willows, because they know that the DOL snowmobiles cannot penetrate through these thick winter snows. And I think when you look at what's going on down there, I was going to show some video today, but I thought it would be nice for a change to just more tell stories and let people kind of feel what's been going on down there. This year alone, we have witnessed, there's been a total of about 43 buffalo out of the park this entire winter, of which they have captured all but 3 big bulls, and essentially what they do is they bring 8 snowmobiles into the Madison River Valley, into the flats, and they'll ride these snowmobiles through the open waters, the tributaries, the Madison River itself. Bring in helicopters, which they'll fly up to 10 feet off the ground. They actually landed twice out in the field in the flats 2 weeks ago. And just harass this entire ecosystem. When you come in this kind of force, you can't selectively pick one species that you want to pick on. You bring in a helicopter, you bring in snowmobiles, you are affecting the entire ecosystem. This year, more than ever, we're witnessing quite a few trumpeter swans laying dead in the river on a rather daily basis almost. And some of that's attributed to the lack of food that's around, but the successive harassment is also playing into the picture. And we witnessed last year a helicopter spooking and making get up and fly away over 300 trumpeter swans. Now, trumpeter swans are listed under the Endangered Species Act as sensitive, and they estimate that there's maybe 2,000 left in the world. Well, over 500 of those 2,000 winter in this area where these buffalo are being harassed on a weekly basis, and these are the kind of things that we witness and occur once a week, at least down there in West Yellowstone. But these buffalo are also brilliant in their own right, and like many of the elk know that during hunting season, they have a giant refuge inside Yellowstone National Park. The buffalo are starting to figure this out and learn this trait in their own way. And about 1.5 miles on the south side of the Madison River, outside of Yellowstone National Park, there's this area that we refer to as Houdini's Meadow. And this meadow was named after probably the strongest warrior I've ever met in my life. Houdini is who we playfully nicknamed this big old bull. 3 years ago, there was only 1 bull out of the park the entire winter, and it was this brilliant older gentleman named Houdini, and he would just come out, and Department of Livestock would come out on all their snowmobiles, and they'd chase him everywhere possible, and of course he'd get back into the thick woods and just kind of hide behind trees and sit and watch as the DOL would get stuck, and they'd all have to run over and help each other and get out of the snow. And finally, they'd keep trying to get him and get him and get him, and it never would work. And he would get away, and finally they'd give up. Well, last winter, Houdini brought out 13 other younger bulls to educate this process too. And we witnessed time and time again, they'd come out and Houdini would teach them different ways to dodge and ditch the Montana Department of Livestock. And on this one particular day when these 14 buffalo were about to get hazed, basically what we do and what we try and do every day out with the buffalo is keep an eye on them and not actually be intrusive and in their face. Our camp is always a good 200 yards away from them. We have several tree breaks so that we're not right in their hair, and maybe 2 or 3 times on patrol for our scientific data gathering, etc. We'll ski on out there and check on the buffalo, make sure that they're all right, but we don't hang out with them. We don't become intrusive. We don't become a problem to them. But on these days when we know the Department of Livestock are coming out to haze or capture or kill these animals, we'll give them what we refer to them as like a heads up in the morning. And traditionally we'll ski out to them and form a line, and we refer to our efforts more shepherding than hazing these animals, and we'll give them a little push into the woods so that they know something's up that day, and they know our behavior is different, and it gives them kind of a sign that danger is on its way. And on this particular day, we skied out, and gave the buffalo a little shepherd into the woods, and sure enough, the Montana Department of Livestock show up on all their snowmobiles, and they're chasing them left and right and going through tributaries, disturbing the whole ecosystem. The buffalo are running through the thick woods trying to dodge them. And we always have 2 patrols because our main focus with the Buffalo Field campaign is to document and show the world what's actually going on out here and let them make their own choice once they see these things. And the people on the north side have a very good vista of what goes on the south side. And they were, at the end of the day, we were hearing stories at our meeting about what they actually witnessed, and they were telling these stories about how a Montana Department of Livestock snowmobile would come over the hill, go through a tributary, and go back into the woods and take off. And sneaking right directly in the snowmobile trail was this one big old bull, who of course we think is Houdini. And he goes through the trail and pops up and goes back into the woods. And behind him were 6 younger buffalo that were learning this. And they sneak down the trail and they're hiding. And this chaotic mess goes on for hours and hours and hours. And finally, the Department of Livestock gives up. And they go home for the day. We return to our camp. And the people that were out there that evening as the sun was setting, sitting at our camp, 11 of these 14 buffalo that were out in the field walked by within 20 feet of our camp. And each one of those buffalo, as they passed our camp, stopped, looked at us directly, and nodded as to say thank you, and then proceeded on back to the meadow. Well, I had the honor of being out there the next morning, and it was right after sunset, the missing 3 big bulls with 2 other members of their family, 2 moms, 2 yearling buffalo, and 1 2-year-old buffalo came by. And the first big buffalo walked right into our camp and was probably the distance from me to you. And he stopped and he held his position. And he waited till the rest of his family had passed us by. And when the last member of the family had passed us by and proceeded out to Houdini's meadow, he looked us all dead in the eye, nodded, turned around, and joined them. And these are the kind of experiences that we experience almost on a once-a-week basis out there with the buffalo. And I guess the one point that I'm trying to project here is that these buffalo are worthy, incredible, intelligent animals that deserve the same right as how we treat all other wildlife, and deserve the respect that we give and have for our wildness. And until this occurs, I can guarantee you the Buffalo Field campaign will be in the field and protect their rights and stand up and be their voice every day until that occurs. And that's all I have to say.
I learned a long time ago, rather than beat my own head on certain walls, that one cannot be rational about an irrational problem. That's mixing apples and oranges. And a true believer is a kind of mindset, whether it might be a terrorist with a bomb or an extreme religious view, or a man I know who is obsessed with cottonwoods. In other words, what I'm saying is it's mindset. And being rational or presenting data doesn't seem to make the smallest dent in this sort of thing. I recall asking one of the Department of Agriculture people years ago, he was saying there was new data that showed transmission, and you don't get, it's anatomical, you don't get transmission other than with artificial insemination. You don't get it with natural service. You don't get it with cattle. So he was saying that there was new stuff to support that the bulls were something of a hazard. He was talking cattle, and I said, I'd like to see your reprints. So he very nicely sent me some photocopies. And I kept thinking, something's wrong with my mind. I keep reading these, and I can't find any data in these to support what he was alleging, that there was new data to support this. I have this wonderful mental caricature when I get really frustrated on that issue. I sort of visualize bull bison walking around out of West Yellowstone dripping contamination. But all I can say is you are asking a rational question for which there isn't a rational answer. Sorry about that. At least from my perspective of the data that I know, there is not a rational answer. I think in some ways, perhaps it becomes a focus because the real issue, there are other kinds of conflicts, of course, besides brucellosis. Let's face it, adult bull bison don't fit very well in the modern constrained world. They simply don't. And it seems to me that there are more complex, at least with individuals, things that underlie, and the purported alleged biology becomes sort of the hook on which to hang these other things. We don't want bison. They're just a cow anyway. There are, a number of things going on. But that's the best I can offer you.
I look at it in the sense of the cattle barons of the West and the history of their strongholds and what they've been able to manipulate forever, and over the last 10 years, I think they've suffered some major blows to their egos. Number one, and I don't think the environmental communities referred to it as a major victory, but I know it was a blow to the cattleman's ego, was Clinton raised the public lands grazing fees on our national forests for them to raise their cattle. Number two, if you look at the only opposition to the reintroduction of the wolves, was of course the ranching communities again. And then you have the bison issue. And one thing that's really, really struck me is the vaccination for cattle, which they've used with great success in Teton National Park for the last 40 years with no case of transmissions, the SARS-CoV-51. It's rated somewhere between 60-something% to 80-something% effective. And the cattleman industry in the state of Montana are demanding a zero-risk situation. And Mary talked about it earlier today that, what instance in life comes with zero risk? There is no such thing, but yet they're demanding that. Well, these percentage of the vaccine, and it's evidently worked in Teton National Park and everywhere else, are about the same percentage that we get with every vaccine that we get as a human. So here we are, the state of Montana is demanding a higher standard of living for cows than they are for humans. And, to me, it's just so ironic, and like Mary said, there is no sense of logic here. It's just, in my honest opinion, it's the last stronghold of the cattle barons of the West. And they're going to see how far they can push it and see how long they can get away with it. And with great representatives like Judy Marks, I don't really think that they're going to have much problem pushing these kind of agendas. So, that's where I see it as.
Actually, the disparity, if I may comment, Mike, is bigger than that. On this issue of how effective the vaccination is. If you line up 100 cows, you're quite right. The percentages you're quoting is usually considered more around 65% on the low end of the scale. But you line up 100 cows, that's what's protected. And by the way, you're not preventing infection. What you're preventing is abortion because that's the primary transmission link. However, if you're an epidemiologist, I talked this over quite a bit with Paul Nicoletti, who's an expert on vaccines at the University of Florida. From an epidemiological standpoint, if you're brucellosis-free, which the cattle are, the actual, I guess you'd, for want of putting it another way, call it a statistical, but the probabilities are such that your vaccination efficacy goes up to something like 90%. And of course, bison are not normally socializing with bison cattle. They may be occupying a use area, but when it comes to behavior, bison will dominate cattle anyway. So there are two different ways of looking at the vaccine, but I have yet to hear one of this cast of characters put out what Paul Nicoletti professionally has said many times, that your effectiveness, if you're brucellosis-free, will go up to that high a percentage. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I wonder, Mike, if it's one thing. Most of those guys are brand inspectors from Eastern Montana. Now, we took a junket, a 7-day junket, stayed at Jordan, Garfield County, stayed at Winnet, and Trone County, Lewistown, Fort Bennett. The place is becoming decowed. There's no range for a cow. There's been intense drought. There's no cows over there, so there's no need of land inspectors. So if you're coming over here for one,
It's called make work, isn't it, Joe?
Okay, Chris?
Yeah, I'd like to thank each one of you first for what you said. That's something very valuable and very different from each one of you. But I have a question for Mary, and I was really interested in what you had to say about the problem inside the park, about habitat degradation and changes that we're seeing in traditional migratory patterns. And I'm wondering to what extent you think those changes represent threats to the survival of wild bison, and also any thoughts that you might have on what we need to be doing about it.
Well, again, Yellowstone is the harshest environment where bison live. The population has lived for centuries. The interior of the park, the best I can do right now is the neoglaciation before the medieval warm, but that's pretty close to 2,000 years that there have been bison in the interior, regardless of climatic fluctuations. And because it is such a harsh environment, and that time span includes the harshest place in Yellowstone, which is the Pelican Valley country. So the end of winter is always stressful. You might say that's part of the normal system. If there's winter kill, it feeds grizzly bears, it feeds eagles, it feeds bluebirds if it's a tough spring because you don't have the invertebrate fauna, the kinds of insects that things like bluebirds eat. It's kind of amazing, all the various pieces that go into that. And but winter is always the crunch time. I said earlier, I think that life is not just what you eat, it's also the energy you spend. Your bison couldn't behave like deer or elk and eat enough to stay alive. The rate of processing in the digestive system, the things they're best equipped to eat in a wild state, would not permit that. And so saving energy is absolutely crucial. This is a big part of why they travel in line. It's part of their evolutionary heritage. And any stress that is added to that, that is human caused, is stacking the deck that much more. I can think of few things that are as inhumane as this agency hazing. Just from the standpoint of energy cost, and stacking the deck on animals that live and are able to live, but do go through, particularly the latter part of winter, getting into this time of year. They're living on an edge anyway. So anything that shifts that is going to make a difference. It costs calories. And in my mind, from purely a humane handling standpoint, if one is going to putting aside the reasons or the lack of reasons, if you're going to dispatch an animal, a classy rifleman is the most humane way to do it, looking at bison. Trapping, some of these things are what I've learned to call people feel good over time. They might indeed, especially if people don't take apart the issue and realize the cost to the animal and the stress involved. The animal wasn't just shot in front of the cameras, it lived. That's life, especially if the same animal is hazed several times a week over a period of weeks. It may die anyway. But people's perceptions vary, and I'm sure there are people who would disagree with me, but I know some fairly strong people who are more of the anti-hunting, don't eat meat, animal rights persuasion, who know enough biologically to share that perspective, that this pushed hazing kind of thing. And I've watched it from the helicopter end. I did a lot of learning during the reductions in the 1960s. And it's not a humane operation.
Mary, on that note, because I wholeheartedly agree with you, and we see this way too often, but is there any way or any suggestions you might have that we could document this a little more? I mean, because, or is it just an impossible phenomenon to prove?
Well, again, we're back to people liking absolutes, and the decisions are always political. And I value the various perspectives presented. But let's face it, if we're in court, what we need is data. And if the political decisions are too removed from that data, in the biological reality, you're either going to lose something you really didn't want to lose, or you're back to the drawing board. And because various things go into this, the age of the animal, if it's a pregnant cow or not, how do you know if the given animal's been hazed a number of times? One of the things that with my colleagues, as we work with this population data, and in the several publications that we have in the mill, that we'll be looking at is some way of looking at the energetics. Now, there has been no actual how much oxygen consumed for various kinds of activities done with bison. They're so tough to work with. There has been with elk, to throw out one for you, it costs an elk 25% more energy to stand up than to stay in its daybed if it's kicked out of a daybed in winter than in snow. And there are numbers for that. There have been field studies. But because things are parallel, you know yourself from being out there, I think, that when you hit knee deep on me is a lot shorter than on, say, a tall person. Knee deep, and I'm being a little loose anatomically, on a bison calf is a lot sooner than it is on a big bull. But when you hit knee deep, your energy costs in snow go up like this. They go up exponentially. That kind of thing can be dealt with computer models and analyses, and you could say, okay, Department of Livestock, how many hazing operations did you run this winter? How many days were you out there? How many animals for each drive? You could then build some kind of a scenario that said if these were all mixed groups versus bulls, what were our snow depths? In other words, you could put some kind of ballpark figure on energetic costs. The field documentation beyond a certain point, I think that has merit because there are people who can't visualize what this means. If you have some shots that actually show animals with tongues hanging out in the deep snow and so forth. And that's how wolves get them, by the way, in Pelican Valley, which was predictable. When the bison are going from shallow, deep areas, the wolves try to get them when they're in that trench. But and once the bisons are on fairly bare ground, they can whirl. They're amazingly quick, amazingly fast. But except for some of that visual impact, I don't think that lots and lots of footage would do you very much good. I think it comes back to being able to say, this happened on X date. We know there were this many drives. We know that there haven't been that many animals outside the park. The air survey should have those numbers, which gives you some sense of how often an individual might have been subjected to these kinds of pushes. My informal sources told me, I don't know it officially, that one of the helicopters was pushing bison 7 miles into the park. That's, I don't think I'll take my comments any further on that, but in other words, there are ways that level of stress can be presented, but it comes back to dealing with the broader picture. And as I say, beyond a certain point, the effort to get photographs. So if you have enough of a file to be able to say, early, late, this was the condition of the animal, some of these things, then I think you have your package.
Great.
George?
I'd like, I guess, to address this question to Scott. But basically, we're never in our lifetime, and this is just a guess, there's a good chance that we aren't going to be able to enjoy bison walking along Interstate 90 or basically in our backyards. They've driven a quarantine or a public hunt like there was. Lesser of two evils. I mean, how do you look at it? If you have a live bison that you treated basically like livestock, put on the ITBC, the Intertribal Bison Cooperative, has good guidelines for good quarantine facilities that are large and basically can handle that animal and at least keep them in an area where they aren't truly farm animals. Is it better to have that, or is it better for the quick shot and give it to, excuse the expression, Bubba and the boys to take home in their back of their trunk? Or is it better to have a live bison that the tribal community can use economically and spiritually and be able to benefit off of it? Is that where we might want to start looking, is quarantine, or is it better for you to just go with a hunt and dispatch the animals quickly? And maybe I'm wrong in thinking this negatively, that bison aren't going to be allowed to walk the plains like they used to. I would hope they would. But how do you feel about that, hunting as opposed to quarantine?
Well, the buffaloes will never be allowed to do what they're designed to do, ever again, nor will the Native American. We're at the millennium where the design of what we were designed to do will never be allowed to happen. You have to get over that. If we are allowed to be a part of the formula, then it would be up to the individual tribes to produce an idea on how they would consider a humane approach to solving this dilemma. Personally, I'm not supportive of a quarantine. I'm not supportive of any scientists poking anymore. I think everybody's been poked enough. I think they've designed that we're human beings and those are buffalo. I think that's clear. I think if scientists want to be involved, they can study at a distance. They don't need to dissect any more buffalo. They know where the hearts are and where the horns are and reproductive organ. If we are going to understand an ecosystem, we needed bigger ground. We needed property that extended from North America to South America. We needed to allow all of these animals free roam. We needed to not put highways and cut off water supplies. We needed to rethink where we put animals and how we rotated animals. And if we didn't think about it, and we've learned about it, then we need to change the way we are doing our agricultural processes. If we are putting too many nitrates in the streams and we're not able to drink the water, then we are only designing ourselves to be so clean that a bacteria can come along and wipe us out easily. My opinion is that I believe that the tribes would like to have live buffalo on their reserves. I believe that they would like to have those animals near and close to their central beings, which are now the prisons of reservations. We're just doing prisoner exchange, from the Yellowstone to the Crow tribe. It's just prisoner exchange. It's not a matter of doing anything more than that. But I don't think that we want tribes hunting in the park. I don't think we want to open up harvesting in the park. If we should, then I would imagine the best process would be a lottery system where we rotated the tribes through on a lottery system. They selected their hunters, and they go in and harvest and distribute. And their liabilities are then theirs. They then can select those people who are the harvesters, and those who are the distributors and the people who will receive, the neediest or whoever. But it's also my opinion that all of those products be marked clearly so that people that are like me who don't want to support any of that, I don't have to buy it. I think just because the Indians have the opportunity to have these pieces for artwork or for food doesn't give them the right to decide for me that this is something holy. I want to have something that's designed from the Creator and processed through my tribe, and I want to stand there when it's done, and I want to witness it, and I want to be responsible for that. So did that answer you any?
Sure.
Well, I am not supportive of quarantine systems. I am not supportive of taking freedom and reducing it down into a quarantine. I do not believe putting an animal that's free into prison is fair. I also don't believe that putting a bullet into an animal because it's being executed out on the open prairie is fair either. It's not their fault. And because it's their size, if that's the problem, that's not their fault either. We should have taken the fences down. You know, if we're going to radio collar something, we should radio collar the cow. You know, he's the one that needs to be located. And these ranchers now, if they need to have a hard winter, they need to get out of their homes and get out there like their forefathers did. Ranching's hard. There's no powder puff. This is the hard industry, that ranching industry. And, you know, pulling calves is hard. Standing out there and freezing is hard. And being out with your cows is not an easy thing. And if they're expecting the government to wipe out the buffalo and make their life easier, they're going to ask the weather to be changed too. You know, so it's always summer. It's not. There are certain points where we have to have reality. Agriculture is number one primary cause of polluting your water. You know, at some point, we as people, as human beings, we have to say, you know, what's wrong here? If I have employees and in my business maybe I happen to have nuclear waste that I'm handling and all of my employees are radioactive, I'm responsible for that. But if my community downstream of a ranch has to put $1 million or $2 million or $3 million into cleaning up their water supply because I'm putting agricultural waste in there, I need to take responsibility what I'm doing to that community. I'm restructuring that community and making them more fragile to the ecosystem. I'm contaminating them by my industry. So, no, I'm not supportive of killing anything anymore. We've had enough killing. It's time for us to learn to get along. And if these scientists, you know, if their route of discovery is continually executing animals as the resolve or removing a weed, they need to rethink their ability to help us to become more harmonized in the world. We need them to rethink their approach to how are we going to be harmonious? How are we going to be part of the world rather than continually disrupting the ecosystem?
Okay, I don't know your name, I'm sorry.
Tricia. In thinking about your question and Scott's answer, there is, Joe here knows about it, the proposal of the big open, north of, around Jordan and whatnot. And if that ever was developed and got off the ground, then you could actually, and then the people up there, they're poor, they can't ranch anymore, there's not, there's a lot of problems. And the whole point is to bring back wildlife as it existed on the plains and sort of help the people who live there and not want to give up their farms to go into a tourist type industry rather than ranching, cattle industry. And that, if they did that, and they're working on it now to try to work toward that, you could actually maybe see buffalo from the highway. I don't know if there's any highways that go through that area.
There's highways going through everywhere.
I have a question.
administration over the last like 15 or so years. Um, Considering our current administration, our representatives in government in Montana now, at the federal level now, I don't see any hope at this time in changing that policy. I wonder what can we do, like your efforts to document, to observe what's happening, I think will help a lot. All of our efforts to educate other people is something that we can do in the meantime. I just wonder if any of you have any thoughts on what else we can do to prepare to change this for the better when the time might seem more conducive to doing so.
One of the things that we as human beings, we as adults need to do is we need to teach our kids. We need to teach our kids that we are losing our environment by the day. And with that, we can have them, as you educate, you learn. We are in a holding pattern right now. We are going backwards for a while in our environment. You can do two things. You can plan for the future, or you can get so frustrated that you'll give up. And that's one of the things that we've learned with the buffalo, is you cannot give up. You lose so much ground when you rest. You've got to get somebody else to take your place in this tug of war. You take sanctuary and then you come back. But the idea is to put the seeds of what you believe we've lost in, maintain the future. And your future is the kids. Teach the kids about, we don't want to say to our kids like what was said to me when the salmon were so big, when there was no buffalo, when there were no wolves. We should never say that to our kids. We have those things now, and we should maintain them. We shouldn't lose ground, and we should vote. It's important to play the process, though it stinks. The process is that when we elect legislators, which are coming up, and they aren't talking buffalo, they shouldn't get elected. This issue has been an issue for 40 years, and those legislators have done only damaged it by giving that responsibility to the DOL. So ask those legislators. Ask them when they're coming around door to door and they're asking you, I'm running for legislation, will you give me $100? Well, tell me your answer to the buffalo issue. In there, you will see somebody who will work for you in the rest of the environment, because this issue is one they will not talk to you about, because they don't have a process and they don't have a plan. They're happy with the way it's going because the community is not involved. All we do is we just get our newspapers, and when the killing starts, we cancel our subscriptions and we go away from it. We hide because our world has sped up and we are frustrated. And now we are in a war with Afghanistan. We're in a war with these invisible terrorists. I mean, how much can we take? So these government issues, they're prime now. They can go in there and wipe out 2,000 buffalo. And you won't even know it because you're so hammered by all the newspaper things. So, the letters to the editors don't work. Going to the schools works. Go in there and tell us kids. Go in there and tell for just one little sentence about the buffalo. We'll drop the seed. That's all you need.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left.
Oh,
We got
fine, good.
Jeannie, and then, I don't know your name either.
Just real quick, what you said, when I live in Southern California, you say, but I have a chance to address a large group of young people when I get back. They have asked me to go in the town of Irvine, and I want to use the buffalo issue for these kids to, get a look at what would be reality, what the thing is supposed to be on a civil disobedience, whatever that is. This woman asked me if I would use Buffalo Field Campaign as a positive method of civil disobedience. So everything that she said today and everything that I've read and So I'm gonna meet with maybe a couple hundred 10-year-olds. And maybe that'll help. I will use what you said and what
Great.
you're saying.
Well, tell them we think about them, and we think about them every day, and we are hoping that we'll have buffalo for them. When they come to visit up here to come see the park, we're hoping that we'll have buffalo for them still in the future. That's the
I definitely
plan.
want to personalize it to them so that they can see that this is what you can have, but you might have to fight to have it.
Yeah, we did this great thing back, I think it was right in the first summer of '97 at an Earth Day event down in Gardner at the high school. And basically, you know, my background's making documentaries, but got underneath the table, had a thing underneath it so you couldn't see it, had a big television up on the screen, but took a video camera underneath and had a buffalo puppet. And had the video on the buffalo puppet, and the kids could see this buffalo on the TV, and it could ask it questions, and it could answer back. I don't know what age group, but that really worked because it got the kids interacting with the buffalo, and just the thought.
I don't know if I can do that in Irvine. I'll do it a good shot.
My generation got our parents to quit smoking cigarettes because of and littering. A lot of those campaigns were focused on school-aged kids in the 60s. And I can remember Daddy, quit smoking and don't throw your cigarette outside. I mean, youth, and in my case with younger, edgier church folks, are we still give them the voice of idealism, and we give them the right to speak truth. And I think we have to recognize that young people can change society more than we realize.
Okay, now your question?
Yeah, my question was actually, this seems, just listening to you all speak, seems to be a question of economics in a sense. And so my question is, how much, or what is the cost of an operation like this at the Department of Livestock? What is this costing the Department of Livestock? Obviously, it seems to be definitely a waste of taxpayer money. Are they, in a sense, making money off this process from sort of supporting the ranchers in this crusade?
Well, their federal budget this year is $1.36 million annually solely for the Montana Department of Livestock. So it's continually been increased throughout the last 5 years, and yeah, there's definitely money-making incentives somewhere in there for them. They used to also, until they got a lot more public scrutiny, have auctions of the hides, heads, and the meat as 3 separate items, but because there's so much public scrutiny nowadays, they now, as a big PR campaign, and Scott's brought up, find individuals from within tribes to donate the meat to. But yeah, there's definitely some incentive for them in a financial ballpark, and I think Joe brought it up for a good point too on that aspect that, you know, they don't need so many brand inspectors anymore because the cattle industry is declining, so here's an alternative employment and to still be in the cattle industry. So
Make job, project.
But I try to look at it the other way though, is that if that, the $1.whatever million budget for this bison operation, how much is it costing us as taxpayers to control each one of these animals in a way that we don't want them treated?
mm-hmm. Yeah. I think someone did a recent analysis of the 148, I think, cow-calf pairs that are on Horse Butte and the 3 grazing allotments, and broke down all the finance of what it was costing them, and it comes out those cows are worth about $35 a pound for us, the U.S. taxpayer, to subsidize.
Well, what's cute, is that this DOL, but now the state of Montana has demanded the Park Service get involved, so now we've increased that group. When we were paying those people, and the Forest Service, we're paying those people. It's a phenomenal amount of money here that's out of our pockets.
It could be better spent or not
In a
spent.
recession, perhaps?
Well, nah, that's another topic.
I have just one question.
Oh, sure you do.
Jackie from Missoula, 5:30 this morning. What's happening? Do you have any good data sets on what's happening to the Yellowstone bison genetically? What's happening?
We have, first of all, some of the genetics work goes back, into the 70s or 80s, before DNA analyses came along. Stormont in California got very interested in blood typing, and that being the only approach, and because he already had a large database, I was able to get samples to him. He was focusing on carbonic anhydrase and the C3 alleles, so we have a higher incidence of the C3 than any other herd. But then you start looking at the DNA, and both Strobeck's work, University of Alberta, predates the Texas A&M group with Jim Durr. He got first into the DNA analyses and with several students. And basically, the way Chris puts it is that there are, first of all, the subspecies of Athabasca and bison are not valid. But there are 4 alleles that are distinct to the northern bison, and so he would say north and south shouldn't be shifted. But his basic summary is that all bison are more closely related than humans. Now, we don't know to what extent that's historical, although having recognized that bison were truly nomadic and spent a lot of time watching how they use the land, which very few people working on bison have been able to do, to me that very much fits the the lack of family structure, only the cow-calf bond, the fluidity of groups, all of these things. I suspect bison, if you went from, say, Intermountain valleys clear to Pennsylvania, you might have, just as you do in mice, somewhat different at the far ends, but you have really quite a mix. On the other hand, we know from most of the founding populations, the captive ones, there was a tremendous amount of shifting back and forth. So what we have is what we have, but we do know that all bison today appear to be genetically quite close. Unfortunately, a number of populations have been documented to have cattle genes, and that's not surprising given the overall history of bison. Yellowstone does not. So in one point-blank answer to your question, at least none of the work to date from either group of researchers has picked up cattle genes. And Yellowstone has been a closed population since 1902. The drives, as you may or may not know, the original wild bison, it's the only place in the United States wild bison did survive. They did. And once really protected from poaching, numbers began to increase. But bison were also brought in, the old Buffalo Ranch situation, bison from Texas, bison from Montana. The present population then derives from all 3 bloodlines with a considerable input. I don't know that it would run as much as half, but certainly considerable from the original wild population. As far as mixing with other populations, I would say no. My recommendation would be very against bringing in anything. It's been a closed population, and it is very much subject to and reflects its own environment, habitat pressures. To me, it's sort of a window on a vanished world. I think of bison as looming out of the blizzards of the Pleistocene more than I think of them on the plains. But genetically, there doesn't appear to be any kind of bottleneck concern from the past. That's as much as I can tell you.
Okay, thank you. And thank everyone for coming. Really appreciate it. And everyone for speaking.
If anybody wants a naked vegetarian toaster, I have some left over from my feast.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay. Thank you for coming.
Make a vegetarian die.
Yeah. Well, it still doesn't work in Alaska.